1948.
Because Father had this clinker-built boat that was hugely heavy. I think it's still in existence. I think cousins have got it. I might have fiberglassed a bit, but it was a really well-built, heavy clinker-built boat. It was, I'm not sure, it was 12 foot or 12 foot 6 long with a 6 foot beam, which is very wide and very heavy. And we first built, when we first came out, we had a tent. We used to erect a tent. We'd get here, just leave 5 o'clock in the morning in about a 5-ton Ford truck and everything loaded up, and get out here and about 4 o'clock time to pinch the tent and that before it got dark. You used to come directly out from Watheroo past the Watheroo Observatory, because once you got past Watheroo Observatory it was just a ploughed track that George Lang built with like a fence line, and it was straight. There was not a bend in it for probably 40 kilometres.
It was still like that.
And it's pretty much still like that. And the sandhills on the west of the observatory, there's bits of sandhills there, it's quite sandy. And us kids would have to get out and put rails between the jewels to get over the hill. Not only on 2 or 3 spots that you couldn't get, but other than that, the old man would plant his foot and away you'd go, and to get speed up to get over the hills. But no trail, that was on the back of the truck with everything else.
Water and almost everything.
Used to bring our own water.
No water here.
We'd come out for 3 weeks at a time to make it work, because it was such a trek. Yeah, which was a couple of 44-gallon drums, and you watched them go.
They were probably very salty and very dirty by the time they went home.
Yeah, we used to catch crays, and we used to catch jewfish not far off the jetties, snapper, and pretty good ones. No jetties, no. The only fishing, the Lombardos, there was, and some other family. There was a couple of Italian families had cray boats. They used to use their sails, but they used to process their own crayfish, and they used to store their bait on the beach in barrels full of salt, and all the ropes in those days were tarred ropes, all pulled by hand, so they never used to fish in that deeper water. And they used to anchor behind Long Island, protected waters, and their bait was stored on the beach here. Later on they used to anchor off the beach, but they used to live on the boats. Yeah, I'm not sure on the years. There was a mothership come in the later 50s, or probably early 50s, I'm not sure, on the date, and the Shelley Boy.
Did you pick up the crays, that was?
By that stage there was a fleet of small cray boats that used to sell them to the mothership, which would process them and everything. In those days, those boats would only, those cray boats, the main reason they used the sail was to keep them straight and stop them rocking, I think. But they used to be flat out at about 7 knots. They didn't go very fast. So they probably didn't go out that far fishing, because they were pulling, initially they were pulling the pots by hand until they got winches. And if the crayfish weren't quite, they used to weigh all tails. Tails used to have to weigh 5 ounces. And if they didn't quite make it, there was a bit of meat stuffed in them to make up the night. We had a boat shed originally. Now, Ken York would probably remember the exact date, but I think it was about 1950. We built a little shack on the beach, and they did the same, and we used to store our boat in there instead of taking them home. And I'd say that was around 1950, because it was only there 12 or 18 months, and they got washed away. The boat undermined with a cyclone or a big storm, because we haven't got any photos, but in Grigson Street, where our block was, and the first few squatters were all along there, we used to be able to put our boat in the water with fairly minimum effort, with rubber blow-up rollers. You'd have about 3 of them, and once you got one under and got it moving, then you'd get the other one, and kids would be running, get another one, and put it around the front. And the water was only, I would say, 40 metres from the road. Grigson Street was actually the top of a sandhill, and if you can imagine in a blow, in the winter, sometimes the water was coming over that sandhill and into our yard. And now look at it, about 150, 200 metres to the water. But we only had to roll that boat. It wasn't that big a job. Then we'd just leave it on the beach while we're out here. But about 1952, we built a shack, which was like a kitchen, which we could store the boat in, with big doors on it. And then about 1953 or 4, we extended it and put a couple of sleep outs on it, so that you could sleep sort of 8 or 10 people. But yeah, we had a wood stove, and then we had a water tank, put a rainwater tank on this little shack there. Yeah, it all progressed pretty quick. It was all second-hand material from an old house we had on the farm, which was pulled down, and we used, it was all corrugated iron and timber frame.
And the big addition was a shower.
Yeah, we put a
shower room on. Yes.
We were the only house that had a shower room for a while. We dug a well, which was only 2 well liners deep, and put a windmill on it. And then we had a tank stand up about 12 feet. And that we enclosed it and had a door on it. And the water used to smell a bit, it was a bit sea-ready, and the water in the well would rise and fall with the tide. It was reasonably fresh, like it was hard, but a lot better than washing in salty water. And we had a hot water system, gas hot water system on it. And it was luxury in those days. And then we put in had a little Villiers motor with a 12-volt generator on it. It charged a battery, and we had light instead of the old Tilly pump-up lights. But that was built. The initial part of that was 52, and shortly after that, very soon after that, there was 4 or 5 shacks all built on the road. There was Yorks and Swintzer and Schultz and us, Passamani, or Snook rather, Snook and Passamani, and then there was a couple others that I can't remember that built a bit further on, but we all built in a line, and then it was surveyed as a township. And I'm not sure on the date of that, but I'd say 56, 58 around then. And when they surveyed them, Gary Snook's father and my father were pretty influential on the roads boards and that in those days. And when they surveyed Ken York's block and our block, to fit the toilet in, the outside toilet in, they were actually a third of an acre. They were bigger blocks. But that's how flexible it all was in those days when they surveyed it.
So those holidays continued on, and and so we had holidays there with our children then after we were married, and we still used to come out.
The same shack.
And because we had a shack there, instead of being once a year, it was Easter and 3-4 times a year. Became not such a trek.
And the road improved.
And Canada Road is where we all came in initially, because that was an army road, because the army had a cookhouse and accommodation here for I think it was basically a CMF, the Citizens Military Reserve or something it was called. And well, they'd had the installation at North Head, and down where the point is now, or where the point used to be, is no longer there. When I was a kid, there was all the machine gun posts there with steel posts, barbed wire, and there was a cookhouse. The cement slab of the cookhouse was up there, and I think that all that would be at least 300 metres out to sea now. It's all gone, long gone.
And Rodney, what about Mrs. Lindsay? When did she?
Oh, well, I didn't actually quite get to that. 1948 we camped in a tent. Mrs. Lindsay's house was in a fair bit of disrepair with asbestos walls and holes and that.
So that was there.
I think in 49, 50 or 50, 51 we used to stay in that instead of having a tent. And I don't know what the arrangement was, whether we had to pay anything, but there was also a tin garage just below the house. This is in Lindsay Street. I'm not sure of the date that she built that, and we used to actually camp in that house for a period out here until we built the first shack. I don't know whether she might have at one stage. All the land this side of Lindsay Street was Crown land, and then she owned all that land now where
Beechridge is.
Beechridge and all that is all the way down Booker.
From Lindsay Street.
She had all that land.
And then Toots used to have the shop there.
Yeah, that was the first shop.
The first shop.
That Huey Hastings and his wife, who had a block of land out here where Richie Morecambe is there now, somewhere just there. He had land there and he was farming that, but he was living in here, and then he did a bit of crayfishing.
The shop sign was quite distinctive because the S was back to front, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah, she had a big shop sign up. I mean, about all you'd get was baked tins of tin food was all she sold, really.
Because they were quite characters of the...
They were real characters.
Jurien back in the day.
He's a real rough diamond. He was mining Goanna or bat out of one of the caves out here for a while, when he used to make a few bob out of that, I suppose. But as far as the crayfishing goes, well, it all happened from when we started coming and catching all these big fish not far off the beach. There was farmers from inland, every year there'd be another shack go up. And it all happened fairly quick, that sort of thing. And then I can't remember when Dobbin's Caravan Park was gazetted and they had a gallon licence.
Gallon licence, that's
to be able to sell beer.
Called a gallon licence back then.
Yeah, there was no hotel or anything like that, and they had this Caravan Park shop, basically right where the Dobbin Park is. It was right next door to the Caravan Park. And they used to manage the Caravan Park shop and the Caravan Park.
It's further down.
And that was the local, used to have some incredible sessions there.
So when was the shack demolished?
Oh, probably
Wouldn't have
early
taken very
70s.
much to demolish it. Early 70s.
It was condemned
Okay.
by George Stark.
So by that time, you'd acquired the farm out here. That was in
Yeah.
1963, out on the
64.
Cockshall Gully Road. So
Yeah,
then
conditional
began another.
purchase farm when the government were leasing conditional purchase blocks. Yeah, I'm not sure when it was kept because it was still there when I was, must have been early 70s when it was still a vacant block now because when, I don't know, when my father died.
78.
78. Was it still there then?
I don't think so.
We used to get a lot of complaints about the squeaking windmill. Yeah, I acquired the farm in 1964, conditional purchase block. And the shack was still there until early 70s because I used to camp there when I'd come out ploughing and that, which would have been, I sowed the first pasture in 1968, so yeah, 67, 68, it was still there. Phone line went into Gregson's only, didn't come in here. I'm not sure when the phone would have got on here. It was.
No, I don't know.
It went,
I think
the army put the phone line to Gregson's, and as I say, during the war, it came from Dandaragan. It was a party line. There was 2 or 3. Badgingarra Post Office eventually come along, but initially, up in, that Badgingarra, I don't know, that would have been late 50s, wasn't it, when Badgie got going?
Well,
Yeah.
I can remember we had a telephone at the farm, halfway up the track there to the shed.
Yeah, a little box on a post.
But that was
Okay.
fairly early on too, wasn't it? When you
Well, that would have been
would that have been off the Gregson's line?
1968 or 9, and we built a Gregson's line, became dilapidated and obsolete, and Telstra was then operated from the telephone station. Was it Badgie, or then after?
Was it when
Must have
the
been when
road,
they put the
Jurien East Road through?
Jurien East Road, I think, came in 1973 off the Brand Highway, because the old road that the army put in, that what Gregson's used to basically follow the river from about where the highway is. And
Canterbilling Road.
Canterbilling Road was the original road. Yeah, I can't remember. I remember we had to build the phone line ourselves, Gregson's and myself and Neil Gilmore. We had to build a telephone line basically from Jurien East Road. So maybe there was cable into Jurien at that time. That would have been about 1968 or 9. Cut poles and we got second-hand cross arms and insulators from one of the depots where they pulled the line down or something. It didn't last that long. It was only rusted and crappy wire, I suppose. Probably only.
But it had copper wire initially, didn't it?
Oh, Gregson's line did originally, but that was all pulled down and became obsolete. And we had to build our own line then because Telstra didn't, too far from Exchange or whatever. Yeah, well, they didn't build a road, they just ploughed through the bush. Well, Langs came from Watheroo. They ploughed the line from the Watheroo Observatory, which was a magnetic observatory built by the Yanks, and that's about
to Dinner Hill.
12, no, the telephone magnetic observatory is about 12 miles from Watheroo, and that was, the road was, the Yanks don't muck around when they spend money, they spend money. Some of the old buildings there are just amazing, but it was a magnetic observatory that was in use till probably close to 60.
Oh, no, after we were married, Rodney, they were there.
Were they?
Yeah, probably till 65 or 66.
But yeah, they built a beautiful house there for the lost fellow. It was built to carry, the roof was built to carry snow. Can you imagine getting snow and weather?
So then Rodney developed the farm with the help of his brother from the farm at Watheroo. Then we moved out here to live in 1978.
Yeah, we actually lived on the farm from 1978 on.
So we had to send our 2 eldest daughters away to boarding school then, and the youngest one, there was no school buses in those days, so we had a bit of a run between, a few other farms out there. We'd bring the kids.
Bring the kids to school, take it in turns.
Jurien?
Yeah, into Jurien.
There was only a primary school, wasn't there?
Oh yes, yeah. That's why the other girls had to go away.
So in reality, I mean, there's an awful lot happened in our lifetime, huge changes. And Jurien, it was great. There was, I don't know, but some Bill didn't know. I think there was something like 70 boats here at one time at the peak. 2 processing factories, and see, they were only, I don't know when there was various motherships for a start, because I've got a gap probably mid-60s or early 60s.
Oh, well, we're still coming out here for holidays though, weren't we?
Yeah, after we were married. But before we were married, I was holidaying elsewhere. They weren't there. Now I believe Gray was actually Frank Rotter, the surveyor. He's got a house in town. He sold his business a couple of years ago. He actually surveyed a township at Gray, he was telling me. Because a lot of these farm blocks and that out here were surveyed by a fellow, Les Anderson, in about 1951 or 2, around that. Because my actual farm, there were 3 blocks there that were taken up by people, well mine was taken up by someone in Victoria originally in about 1952 or 3 and then handed back to the Lands Department. It was reallocated in the early 60s. So yeah, it goes back a fair way. And Grigson's, well, they used to have a real bush track going out the back up towards Mount Lesueur and back around. It must have been quite a journey to get to Moora for supplies, and they would probably only do it 2 or 3 times a year. Well, because you had the railway line, you see. The Midland Railway line went in 1896 or 1901 or something like that. And that Dandaragan itself is older than Moora. So that must go back to the, I don't know, all that information would be in Walter Padbury's time. Padbury Buildings in Guildford. He was a real entrepreneur. He took up Gatheroo, which is a big old property in Dandaragan. He took up Cockershaw Gully, I think basically because it's on the stock route. He took up Warragon Station. You know, those blokes are just amazing. They got on took their horses on a ship, got off at Cossack and went riding and took land up. And they picked out some of the best land. Just amazing back in 1850. I think that would have all been knocked on the head once the Midland Railway line went through. Because there was nothing much west except there's a pocket of good land around Dandaragan, and all this land out here, all the sandplain country, wasn't viable. You couldn't, it was deficient in minerals. And it wasn't until the 50s that the scientists found out what it was. It was copper, cobalt and zinc mainly. The horses out here, like Gregson, there used to be a horse breeding reserve. Round Mount Lesueur, on the old lithos, is a horse breeding reserve. And that's what Gregsons were doing initially, was breeding horses for the agricultural areas, draft horses and that sort of thing. And then they got into cattle, I'm not sure when, but a lot of them they were basically grazing on scrub, a lot of them, but they weren't doing that well. And it was cobalt deficiency. I can remember seeing stallions that had knees swollen up like that, and it was cobalt. Just a minuscule amount made the difference. And even to this day, out in a lot of this sandplain country, we have to put a little bit of cobalt on the pasture, particularly on the lighter country. And it was right down the coast. Bustleton and all that was the same. They had a bit of land around Guildford, but then they moved to York, grow stuff, and then they went to Granite Flats and that strong country initially. And anyway, that's probably about it.
About us.
That's about us anyway.
We live in town now.
20 years since we come to town now.
Yes.